Yeah. So I am Abdelrahman Elbashir. I am an architect. Thank you, Hanaa, for the introduction. Um, I joined Docomomo sometime before, and I basically presenting to you this part of my thesis. Basically, it's my thesis was named Sudanese cinema, an archaeological Sudanese cinema, a retrospective archaeology. And this chapter is the screening space, the rise and fall of a typology. So this is um, the fourth chapter of my thesis, and it deals with or presents a kind of an argument, basically about could we actually consider the Sudanese cinema as a distinctive kind of typology based on the research that I did in April 2020, 2022 in Khartoum of 15 cinemas in the capital. So yes, so the first, let's say, essay is dealing with the idea of urban archipelago and cinema as a public space. There are numerous cinemas in Sudan were built over more than half a century in Khartoum and other cities in the country that can sum up to 80 actually. And most of these were built in the beginning in Khartoum, where we can see here near to the Blue Nile. Basically, the first cinema was Blue Nile Cinema, and it was soon followed by many others across at that time, the new capital of the country after the fall of Omdurman. Basically, this idea of cinema as a public space can be seen in Sudan in a very special way, or let's say distinctive way, because the growth of the cinema and the spread of these buildings across the capital was actually going hand in hand with the development of its urban fabric with all the characteristics involved. Basically, the first in the early colonial time, the divide between different, let's say, classes of society. Namely, the first one is the colonial community and the Sudanese elite that was associated with that community in Khartoum. And following that, also the development in the post-colonial times, where many other cinemas were built basically in other parts of the capital, especially after the establishment of the Sudanese National Cinema Company, which grew as a way of resistance against colonial policies of restricting basically the Sudanese public from entering these kind of buildings or these kind of theaters. And mainly over the period of from the 30s to the 40s in the 20th century, we witnessed the development of a few cinemas in Khartoum that were basically kind of an elitist cinemas that were serving basically, as I said before, the colonial community. But soon, basically, this took another turn when the city started to grow and to go beyond let's say, the historic center, and mainly through Omdurman and Bahri, or Khartoum North. And here we can see that the cinemas, after being mainly built in the civic centers near to the governmental buildings and other authoritarian kind of edifices, now it's being kind of entangled or in an entanglement with the residential areas. And you can see that clearly in Omdurman, where we have like cinemas like Al Arda and Al Thawra, and yeah, and this kind of divergence into in the development of the cinema and its relation with the urban surrounding uh, kind of gave the phenomena in Sudan a special kind of image because of how these buildings were actually in a very clear way integrated with the kind of social activities that were taking place in the different neighborhoods, residential areas, suburbs even, because when these kind of buildings were being built, some of them were actually built at that time were actually suburbs, especially in Omdurman and the north of Khartoum. The urban relations of the cinema theater in Sudan is kind of very interesting to observe. The area in front of the cinema entrance tends to be the largest, and is serving as a focal point of the social interactions. Uh, and of course, the buildings themselves are quite interesting. They are in many cases double floored and expressing many different features depending on when they were built, and the distribution, of course, of these buildings across the capital followed the development and the sprawl of the city, that somehow gave us a way to also observe or measure or make a benchmark of how Khartoum, as one of the largest cities in Africa, grew over time. I will go on so that I can also leave some time for the Q&A session. And I will go to the idea of typology. So basically, this part is asking a question or many questions regarding the Sudanese cinema. The first one is, what are the defining characteristics of these structures? And the second one is, are they comparable with contemporary open-air cinema theaters elsewhere from that period? These two questions are important because through them we can actually answer the question of whether the Sudanese cinema could be considered a distinctive typology, which is a kind of one of the main issues of my research, is to try to see how can we actually observe or study comparatively the idea of the type through the cinema. The first question, of course, we need to see the designs of these buildings in a very careful way and to study them from many angles, of course. This is an aerial view to show you basically how the basic, let's say, architectural relations of the elements within one building can be comparatively studied to see how could we define basically the Sudanese cinema. One of the first observations, you could see that they're all or mostly all of them are open air cinemas, and this is a kind of a special trait of the Sudanese cinema since its inception, since its beginning from the Blue Nile cinema, which you see at the top left part of the screen, until the end of the 80s. Most of these cinemas were built in this kind of let's say type, which is featuring an entrance block, a screen, and an open space in the middle. Of course, this was a tradition in the design of Sudanese cinemas until the 70s, where the Friendship Hall was built, and 1 year later the Youth Palace cinema also was built, and these were the first actually indoor cinemas that were also like air conditioned. And we can ask the question why this kind of type developed, and we can answer in two ways basically, or together. both ways could answer this question. The first is that we can basically say that this is uh, related to the climate of Sudan, and basically the hot arid climates and its harshness can lead to this type being preferred, because it's especially when the air conditioning technology was still in the development, of course. This was a great solution that you can actually do the screening during the evening time. So you have basically the darkness that you need for the screening, and at the same time you have a fresh air and less temperature. The second is, of course, the cost. Sudan is was and still a developing country, and basically these kind of types could be a solution for a more cost-effective way of making a screening space, basically. And in my research, I think the answer is basically two of these reasons together, which ended up giving us this kind of special relations of spaces, yeah. And here you can see basically in a more simplified way this kind of types. Yeah, and we can actually go on to say that are they really distinctive? Are they really special? Of course, from in the history of cinema, the beginnings were actually humble, and most of the screenings were happening in cafes and open spaces, of course. But soon a certain development happened with the architecture of cinema, and we have indoor spaces that were screening films. But then, of course, in summer times, in some parts of Europe, mainly Southern Europe, the Mediterranean region, we have this kind of an open air kind of screening space, especially in Greece and Italy and Spain. And basically, this was a kind of a summer activity in many of these European regions. And we can relate this also to the history of the cinema in Sudan and its beginning, when actually the first commercial cinema, which is Colosseum Cinema, was established by brothers Lekos, who are from with a Greek origin. We can see kind of a translation of that kind of culture or that kind of architectural expression coming with the establishment of the Colosseum Cinema. But of course, Colosseum Cinema is way bigger than what we can see in these kind of regions. And of course, with many additives, like the building in the front, the block of the entrance is kind of making it a special kind of building. And the other photo, you can see also a cinema in Aden in Yemen, Hurricane Cinema, which kind of also throughout my study, I found many similarities, but of course, the size was the issue that basically differentiate the Sudanese cinemas from the Yemeni cinemas. And so basically with this, we can actually go to a conclusion that basically the Sudanese cinema type is kind of this, or let's say characterized by three basic attributes, which are the size and architectural expression and the monumentality. And the size is, of course, coming from the two aspects, basically the area, square meter area, which can go up to 2,500 in some cinemas. And the second is, of course, the number of the spectators or the watchers or the people who are attending these cinemas at the time, which can also go up to 3,500 spectators in some of these cinemas, like Omdurman Cinema or Colosseum Cinema. And the second attribute is the architectural expression, which is a kind of a feature that has always been part of the design of the Sudanese cinema since its beginning, where we had strong classical features with romantic elements across the facade and other parts of the building throughout the period of the 50s and 60s, where we have this kind of hybrid of classicist and modernist architectural styles until the period of the 60s and 70s, where we have clear, distinctive modernist styles that can be best exemplified by the Al Safia cinema in Bahri, which was built by the late architect Abdelrahman Mustafa. Yes, so also following the conclusion of the study, we can also conclude many elements of the Sudanese cinema. Throughout this study, I basically coined 5 of these that can actually be elements that help us to define and study cinemas in Sudan. The first element is the entrance block and facade, which is the part that basically faces the public, the urban, and it's basically typically comprised of 1 or 2 floors, double height sometimes, and with many architectural expression and design. And the lower part is of course for the public with the entrance public and the ticket part, and on the 2 sides there are like stairs leading to the upper part where you have a balcony, and the upper floor has typically a room, a projection room that is also housing the technical equipment of the screening. The second element is a screen, which is basically the tallest part of the cinema, which can go up to 12 meters in some cases, and its features are quite unique because it's a curved screen and with a frame basically. So it's framed with in some cases with ornamentations that kind of give it a special design or a kind of special expression depending on of course when it was built and in which kind of style the cinema was built in, and so on. The third element is the open space, which is typically the open space that lies between the audience space and the screen. And this space is essential for many reasons. One of them is actually it's ensuring the optimal dimension for the screening, which is basically depending on the angle and basically also the numbers of the people. And this kind of element gave Sudanese cinema a special, of course, size, because of when you need to house as many as you can, you of course need a larger space and a larger screen.
Abdelrahman, have 1
Yes.
minute.
Okay, I will go on. And the third element is the tiered stepped area, and the fourth, I think this is the fourth one, the tiered stepped area, which is the audience space. And you can see them here in a diagram, which is easier to understand. And in a isometric view, this is Omdurman cinema, and you can see all the elements together in one picture. And I will go on now with this kind of gallery of the photos that I took during my field trip in 2022 for the cinemas in Khartoum. Many of these are in terrible condition now, and we don't know after the war what kind of situation that they're in. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope that the presentation was clear. This is the presentation I used for my thesis, so sorry if it was a bit outdated. And
So, thank you for the introduction. We're both practicing architects based in Bahrain, and this is part of our ongoing research that we've worked on for about a year. We're not ready to publish yet, so we were really skeptical. What do we do? What information do we place in? So, what we've chosen to focus on today was to show how Andalus cinema came into being, the story behind that, because what we first start to see is that it's actually placed in Isa Town. And Isa Town is significant for multiple reasons. One of which is it is the first publicly planned city after the development of Manama and Hawaii in Bahrain, which was a sort of an organic development where people resided. And with the urban sprawl and a lot of developments happening, it was the first public urban planned city. And it's also significant because in relation to how people live in Bahrain, it was the first city that's not directly on the coastline. So there was a lot of new elements in urban planning, let's say. When we look at the urban plan, or this is mainly one of the plans that we found, and we start to see the very organized, gridded, centralized public space, sort of public area and social areas. And the consultants here who designed this in very close venture with the Ministry of Housing was George Wimpey Consultancies, which is a British consultant. And we'll move on to the bigger map that shows the bigger context of the city itself. We notice that unlike other organically grown cities where there is a blend of commercial and historic and commercial and in the middle of residential areas across different neighborhoods, the focus was on this central spine that goes across Isa Town that has the commercial area to its left, or the social area to its left, and where Andalus cinema is placed today. Not today, but where it was planned to be designed, it was built, but it was demolished after a while. Isa Town also, now what was interesting for Maryam and I is that Isa Town was also the first city where a lot of both architectural and political statements were made in a way. It was built during the time, it was opened in 1968, the official inauguration of it. And there were a lot of regional architects at the time were brought in to design elements of the space, like the main gate of Isa Town that we saw in the first slide over here as the formal entrance to the city was designed by Mohammed Makiya. The cinema itself, Andalus cinema, was defined by Rafat Shadirji. And we see one of the first few elements of public sculptures that the intent is to give sort of a sense of place to people. And all of this is relevant because relevant to our conversation in an urban context, because we start to see that there was an intention to place a cinema there as a form of bringing people together in this urban center. We start to have a first few looks of the building elevation, and we can see a lot of people gathering. And what Andalus cinema played a role is that there were multiple stories that we got here and there from people. We started gathering oral histories, and people used to gather at around 5 at the gates or next to the sports club. They would decide what film they want to go to. From the tickets, as you can see down here, that would be produced on a monthly basis, and each month would have a different color of the movie guides, so to represent that it's a new month, it's a new schedule.
And now to kind of put you in the context of why we're talking about Isa Town and why cinema in particular, because cinemas didn't start in Isa Town. It was first started in Manama, the city, which was one of the two main cities in Bahrain that had a flourish in economy, in politics, in education. It was the main pearl of Bahrain. So the start of cinema started in Manama. As you can see, this is an aerial view of Manama, the coastal city. And the first initiative, it was a modest initiative by one of the merchants of Bahrain called Mahmoud Saati. The initiative was basically a small hut placed up like in front of the shore. They were using wooden chairs and only a single wall made of the palm leaves to project the films, silent films. So that first initiative was bought by a merchant, an individual, not by the government itself. That's how we can see that most of the the economic and the educational kind of initiatives were by individuals, by Bahraini individuals. And
which is the same thing we see across different ventures in Manama. It grew sustainably over time because there were it was more like a business venture rather than a controlled environment to create. And people felt the freedom to express. There was a lot of foreign residents in Manama. So the people of Manama, as described by a lot of documentation sources, also does say that they were more open to receiving, and they had more international exposure to start with. Although the second photo is quite late, it's in 1945, but we tried to pin down where that would be, Mahmoud Saati's cinema today. It would be where the Grey Mackenzie building was, which is where today's downtown Rotana Hotel is. And it's interesting because it's in the part of Manama that is known to be the lands are owned by the main merchants in the city at the time. And he also strategically used an empty land that was already surrounded by a lot of the local coffee shops that were there, like Gahawi Shabia, the Kant Mawjuda. And so the physical and the social interaction was already existing. What he did was he brought in something in the middle. And not to say that there was a lot of opposition on this. So this was in 1922. There were a lot of religious oppositions on displaying film at the time, which eventually led to it shutting down for reasons we're not really sure of. There's no specific written forms. But after 1922, or the period that it ran, there was a huge gap between the next one, the first public cinema that was established, mainly because of the fear of the resistance. Bahrain at the time was controlled by the British. It was a colonial state. So as a form of storytelling, we looked into different letters that narrates the story from the period of 1934, which was the first mention of a cinema, up to 1937, which was the first establishment of the public cinema. And the first one was was a letter addressed to the British advisor at the time, which is, I hear a rumor that an Arab is arranging to establish a cinema here. And basically, what's the story of it? And apparently people after Saati's cinema and to the establishment of the first public one still did informal screenings here and there. Ali Yatim was actually the first to be given permission right around the end of the 1920s to start a cinema. But then because of his death, that wasn't continued. And since then, his son Hussein tried to pick that up, but was denied the permission. So we also see that there was a sort of control of uncertainty on the conversation of who's to be the one to bring that initiative forward. After that, in 1935, we see that BOPCO, which is the Bahrain Petroleum Company here in Bahrain, and they were the first who also created the company town of Awali, which was the first actually urban planned city, but the first public one can be considered to be Isa town. And what happened here was they only had permission to establish the cinema in Awali Cinema, because it was part of the condition to only display the films to American and British residents at the time, and that it would not be a commercial venture. And during that time, from 1935 all up to 1937, there were multiple applications to the advisor from international interests, like Paramount Pictures, Kohinoor, even the ruler at the time, Sheikh, his nephews as well tried to, but they were all declined. And at some point when the applications kept increasing, there was a conversation of eventually this is going to happen and there's no real reason to say no to. So the advisor at the time reached out to India, which was also under British rule at the time, to send them a copy of their censorship guidelines and fire and safety regulations for cinema buildings, just to, you know what, at least we can control it a bit, which leads us to the first public cinema opening in 1938.
Exactly. It was a collaboration between three people, Abdullah Zayed and Hussein Yatim, which was, we mentioned earlier, the son of Ali Yatim, and Sheikh Ali bin Isa Al Khalifa. Those three collaborated into creating this first public cinema in Manama near the graveyard in Manama. So basically, this building, this is a kind of standalone building. It has the screens inside with wooden chairs. They were not like velvet ones like the modern cinema right now. And people were attracted to that first cinema, and it was highlighted by the screening of Widad, the film.
Yeah. And after that, we see like a huge growth in Manama. So the old city of Manama is considered to be here, and the growth of the cinemas over time was mainly on the outskirts of the city and not inside. So there still was some sort of conservative attitude towards placing them within the commercial areas of the residential zones here. And from which also we start to see the expansion in the typologies, the type of typologies which we're coming to.
Maryam, you have 1 minute.
Sure. And in this letter, what we see is also the moving and mobile cinemas from Bobco again as an initiative to go to the villages where electricity wasn't available yet.
And we have like 4 typologies that in general like had the cinemas in Bahrain. The open air, the first initiative, and then the standalone buildings, multiple of them, and the mobile cinema, which were go from village to a village, and then later to the air-conditioned buildings, also standalone. We have multiple ones.
Yeah. So we just wanted to compare here between the vibe, the open air vibe, and the colonial sort of architecture, mainly, which we see and find in Manama, to what's available in Isatam, which is a very repetitive, sort of a bit dry and very organized and structured way that's which is a problem that we face today in our urban cities. If something feels too controlled, it is almost setting us up for failure in that sense. So this was what was going on in Isa Town, away from that commercial center in the middle. And when we look at the gate that we talked about earlier, this is where the cinema is in its context. The main ceremony that was happening on the center. And then we talk about the building. Now, the architecture is something that we wish to talk about more in the publication, but the architecture of this is very significant. The French Typology is known to use a lot of proportions and the usage of a lot of arches in the way that it's done in his designs. And what's significant about this one is that in plan view, it's just these repetitions of arches that you see both in plan and elevation over here. And what was sad about the cinema is, as expected, and because of the film technology, the way that film was projected at the time, it was very flammable. Just a few years after its opening in 1972, there were 2 major fires that eventually, the Cineco at the time, in 1989, gave the building to Ministry of Education. It was used as a cultural hall for a while, and then
It's demolished.
completely demolished.
One of the landmarks of cinema in Bahrain was demolished because I think the lack probably of documentation and giving importance to such buildings that were built by such remarkable architects.
Exactly. And this building, when it was demolished around the period of 1990s, with a few other buildings, standalone cinemas that we see in Manama, were completely demolished because of that natural growth into the 21st century, and cinemas started opening in malls, and lifestyle just basically changed. So this was just a minor attempt to document, and hopefully when our publication is out, we'll make sure that it reaches you. Yeah, thank you for being here.
It's a great honor to discuss an important chapter in Iranian architectural history and the transformation of cinema architecture in 20th century. In this talk, I will explore three remarkable cinemas: Cinema Metropole, Cinema Asia, and Cinema Niagara, to illustrate how global architectural movements influenced the design of Iranian cinemas and how these buildings became cultural landmarks in their time. With the arrival of cinema in Iran, watching films became more than entertainment. It turned into a social event with cultural significance and lasting memories. Cinema halls emerged alongside urbanization, playing a key role in promoting civic life and social interaction. Cinema Metropole, an outstanding example of Art Deco architecture, was designed by Barton Hovhanessian and opened in 1946. Inspired by Western cinema designs, it created a grand space for films and cultural engagement. Located on Lalezar Street, a hub of modern life in Tehran, Cinema Metropole became a social and cultural center with a seating capacity of 1,100. It combined cinema, theater, and office functions, making it more than just a movie theater. The building featured a concrete frame, horizontal lines, decorative plasterwork, and artistic lighting. Its iconic entrance with rounded columns and vertical neon sign added to its unique charm. Hovhanessian, influenced by European modernist style, introduced Art Deco architecture to Iran, moving away from traditional designs and aligning Iranian architecture with international trends. In summary, Cinema Metropole was not just a cinema. It was a symbol of cultural and social progress, marking Tehran's entry into modernist architecture. After World War II, during the 1950s, US financial aid and importance of modern material and technologies sparked a transformation in Iranian architecture. Architects like Hushang Seyhun embraced these innovations, bringing Iranian architecture closer to global styles. A key example of this change is Cinema Asia, designed in the early 1950s and opened in 1958. Cinema Asia reflects modern architecture influenced by international style and streamlined modern. Its simple and elongated design features a glass facade that changes with a light, creating a dynamic and cohesive look. Two white horizontal bands frame the structure, adding visual unity. The building is divided into two main areas. Ground and first floor included these house commercial spaces, the main entrance, and bright waiting halls with glass walls and floor-to-ceiling windows. Auditorium and balconies. Balconies included the main hall with acoustic insulation and well-arranged seating, offers a comfortable experience for audience. Glass corridors and innovative staircase add a sense of movement and connection, enhancing the flow between different sections. Using modern materials like aluminum and transparent design elements, Cinema Asia embodies the spirit of modernism. The glass facade reflects both light and the building's functions, showcasing influences from the expressionist and streamlined modern style. More than just a movie theater, Cinema Asia symbolizes the architectural and urban transformation of 1950s in Iran. Its innovative design and modern technologies highlight how Iranian architecture aligned with global trends, meeting both cultural and social needs. The 1950s were a turning point for Iranian architecture, influenced by global trends after World War II. Architects like Le Corbusier, Oscar Niemeyer, and Walter Gropius inspired major changes. Among these, Cinema Niagara, designed by Paul Abkar, is a key example of how Le Corbusier's ideas shaped modern architecture in Iran. Completed in 1957 and opened in 1958, Cinema Niagara features a simple, elongated structure made of modern materials like concrete, metal, glass. The facade includes concrete screen above the entrance that provides shade and connect visually to Le Corbusier's famous works such as Chandigarh buildings. The interior includes a main foyer, an auditorium with 1,500 seats and 3 waiting halls. The summer terrace with room for 2,500 people offers a unique open-air film experience. Indirect lighting in the auditorium creates a calm atmosphere, and advanced acoustic insulation ensures a great experience for viewers. The seats inspired by American designs are made of metal with red velvet upholstery for comfort. The hall's slope ensures clear views for everyone, while multiple exits allow quick evacuation. Cinema Niagara concrete screen reflects Le Corbusier's design principles, linking it to projects like Chandigarh and the Ministry of Education in Rio de Janeiro. This makes the cinema a pioneer of Le Corbusier's inspired architecture in Iran. More than just the cinema, Cinema Niagara represents the cultural and technological changes of 1950s in 50s Iran by blending modern architectural principles with local needs. It transformed Tehran's urban landscape and created a unique cultural space. In conclusion, Iranian cinema architecture in the early 20th century underwent major changes. Iranian architects, influenced by global movements in the 1930s, adopted styles like Art Deco. Later, the international style and the works of architects like Richard Neutra and Le Corbusier further transformed the design of cinemas after World War II. These changes show how Iranian cinema architecture adapted to and aligned with modern global trends. These buildings have experienced periods of both prosperity and decline, and unfortunately, they are now among the abandoned and closed cinemas of Tehran. Thank you for your attention.